If you want to survive an EMP, the first thing you need to do is assess your current location. What will your neighborhood look like 3 days after an EMP, 3 weeks after an EMP, and 3 months after an EMP? Remember, an EMP means the end of civilization as we know it. Without power, cars, or computers, we'll have no police, no grocery stores, no municipal water, no sewer services, no fire, no EMS. If you're in a metropolitan area, the images we've been watching from Venezuela of looting and food riots, those are all going to be happening in your neighborhood within the first day or two after an EMP. 3 weeks into the crisis, cities will be filled with the stench of rotting corpses. Without water, you can survive roughly 3 days, and the majority of the population has no idea how to filter water, purify water. 3 weeks after the EMP, people in the cities with no survival skills will have either died of dehydration or waterborne illnesses. The people who are still alive will be either those with survival skills who've prepared beforehand or the hardcore criminal element who've taken what they need by violence. You do not want to try to ride out the aftermath of an EMP near a major population center. Must do number 2. Decide where you're going to ride out the chaos. After assessing your current location, you have to decide if you're going to be safe in that location for the foreseeable future. If the answer is no, you have to develop an alternative plan. This is a huge task, so start thinking about it now. Do you have friends or family who live in a rural location that you could go to within 24 hours? Remember that you probably won't have a vehicle unless you own a car built before 1980. Even then, you want a contingency plan. If you're planning to stay in your current home until D-Day, you'll have to bug out the second the EMP hits because your window of opportunity to get ahead of the chaos will be very short. I would expect cities to become violent in the first 24 hours and more rural areas to break down within 3 to 5 days. So if you're planning to travel a long distance, a bike is probably your best option. Make sure you're riding your bike regularly and that you're keeping the tires filled with air. Bugging out to locations more than 100 miles away shouldn't even be considered. A big problem for many is that they work in the city and they can't uproot their family, which would cause a major personal financial crisis. And doing all of that for a threat that may never happen. If that's you, consider moving to the suburbs. You'll have to pay for it with a long commute, but your reward will likely be a larger property at a lower price. Hopefully you'll be able to find a home with more room for storing supplies and a bigger yard to plant fruit trees and start a garden. While it's not the best solution, it will raise your chances of survival. And in a scenario like an EMP, every little advantage can be the difference between life or death. Must do number 3. Now that you've decided where you're going to ride out the collapse, start stocking that place up. If you elected to bug out to the country with friends or relatives, sit down with them and develop a plan. They probably don't want a ton of your junk cluttering up their house, but they might be open to you purchasing a storage shed and placing it on their property. You can stock up a year's worth of long-term storage food, ammo, clothing, first aid supplies, and toiletries that aren't susceptible to the climate. Since a storage shed isn't climate controlled, stick to things that won't be affected by extreme temperatures. If you stock up shampoo and it freezes outside, it's probably going to bust and make a mess when it thaws out. I did a show on food storage last week, so if you missed it, go back and listen to it for great tips on food storage. Finally, stock up on seeds of foods that grow easily in your area. Do the research now while you have YouTube and the internet. Start a small garden now, just to start learning what the challenges are that you'll have in trying to produce your own food. The learning curve is steep, and if you wait till game day, you probably won't make the cut to the 10% that survive. Must do number 4. Figure out how you're going to get water to the place where you've selected to ride out the mayhem. It's impossible to store enough water to survive long term. You have to find a reliable water source. If you're near a lake, pond, or stream, figure out how you're going to filter the water and purchase the filters and materials you'll need. If you have a well, either for your house or for irrigation, you can have a hand pump installed for around $150, everything included. That's the pump, the base, and the installation. The least reliable source of water would be a rain catch system because there you're dependent on the weather for your very survival. You can purchase food-grade 55-gallon barrels either online or from Craigslist to catch the runoff from your gutters. But this water still needs to be purified because you don't know what the birds have been doing on your roof. You'll need to store as much water as you can every time it rains because you never know when the next dry spell's coming. Must do number 5, secure your retreat. Regardless of how far you are, desperate people are going to come knocking. If you're planning on taking others in, make provisions for them now. Do not alter your plan after the EMP happens. Obviously, you'll need the proper weapon systems to fend off attacks and looters. You'll need enough people to maintain a 24-hour guard. One more thing that I want to give you, and we'll think of it more as a bonus tip for surviving an EMP than a must-do, but you want to think about bartering. You don't want to, this isn't something you want to depend on. You want to have all your supplies, all your food, all of your weapons, your ammo, your clothing, everything that you could possibly think that you're going to need already pre-positioned on the property that you're planning on riding out the chaos. But inevitably, things are going to come up and things are going to arise that you absolutely need to survive, that either it broke or you ran out or it was stolen or it molded or it was ruined or something went wrong in your plan. So you have to have something for contingencies. And for the most part, you want to stay on that property and go out as little as possible, because every time you go out, you're taking a risk and you're putting yourself in jeopardy, you're putting your team in jeopardy. And so the safest place to be is at your secure facility and just holding down the fort and not leaving. And that's the same in just about every disaster. You want to just be in a position that you don't have to leave. But inevitably, for a long-term survival situation, things are going to come up and you need to have some things to trade. Gold and silver are great forms of wealth preservation, but those aren't really good for a survival situation, at least in the initial stages. People are going to be looking for things that they need to get by. If you look at Venezuela right now, nobody wants gold, nobody wants silver. They want rice right now. Those people are starving to death. They have, they're eating cats and dogs. The cats and dogs are running out. Unfortunately, the thing that comes after cats and dogs is typically cannibalism. So those people want food. So your number one thing that you want to stock up to have something to barter with is going to be extra food. Besides that, if you're in a community and you're depending on others for mutual defense, but they're not necessarily part of your compound or part of your team, those people might be okay to barter for ammunition with those people. But you would never want to barter ammunition with people that are outsiders that you don't know who they are, because that ammunition could very well be used to overrun your compound and take everything that you have and kill you and your family. So other things that might be barter items are going to be things like hygiene items, shampoo, razor, soap, laundry detergent, anything like that. But your primary thing is going to be food, because that's the thing that everybody's going to need. And for that first year, while people are trying to adjust and learn how to produce on their own, it's going to be very, very difficult. And if you've got extra food, then that's going to be gold in a post-collapse scenario. Water filters, that's think about the things that the EMP Congressional Commission said that people are going to die of. Anything that can prevent those people from dying are going to be things that are going to be of value for bartering in a post-collapse society. Another thing is batteries, because there's not going to be any power, and unless you've got some type of a solar generator to recharge your own batteries, that's going to be something that's going to be really, really in high demand for flashlights, for night vision equipment, or whatever, for handheld communication devices, for walkie-talkies that people had stashed in the Faraday cages, which you can make a little Faraday cage out of a metal ammo box. You pull that little rubber seal out of the top of it, stuff all your line it with cardboard, put your goods inside there, and then use aluminum HVAC tape around the seal of the top of the ammo box, and that's gonna block rays. If you put everything inside a Mylar bag inside that ammo box, that's gonna add an extra layer of protection if you wanna have some walkie-talkies and electronic devices for after the EMP.
Solid-state electronics are exactly what they sound like. Devices built entirely from solid materials, and where the electric current stays inside that solid material. That means most electronics built in the last 40 years, including computers, cell phones, stereos, radios, you name it, if it has solid-state electronics in it, it's dead. Then there's the second whammy from the EMP. Just in case any electronic equipment survived the first, the electrical grid acts as a huge antenna, attracting and absorbing the EMP in an electrical surge that is much larger than the systems are designed to deal with. This flows down the power lines, frying transformers as it goes. Getting to homes and offices, it fries surge protectors before going on to destroy any electronic equipment connected to it. So even if the equipment is protected, it will still be completely destroyed. Then the EMP apocalypse starts. On that day, the first any of us notice an EMP attack is that the power is out. We try to use something and it doesn't work. No working electronic devices, no cell phones, and no portable electronics. All fried. If you're driving, your car suddenly stalls without reason. Everything just stops working, and we don't know why. We cannot see the explosion since it happened so high, especially during the daytime. People don't realize what's happening. At first, they think it's a normal power outage, and they wait for the power to come back on. They blame the batteries for their phone not working, and they think that their car just broke down. It takes time for them to understand that something more sinister is going on. Can you imagine that? Your neighbors all standing around outside, talking about the weird things happening. Not one of them thinks of an EMP because they're not trained to think that way. They think that a truck hit a power pole or something else happened, which will be fixed in short time, getting the power back on. Only you and me know that the power won't be coming back on. Really, it will be years of suffering before the power comes back on. You see, the transformers that are used in the substations are custom made and take over a year to build. The controls for the power plants are all custom built as well. The power won't be coming on because all of those sensitive electronics have to be remade from scratch, since any backups will be fried by the EMP too. A few simpler electronics may survive, but you can't tell without the grid providing power. They are essentially worthless without electricity. Everything that's controlled by electronics stops working. There are no gas pumps working. Stores aren't able to sell anything. All communications is down, and the city water is shut down as well. Whatever money people have in the bank is gone, because most of it is just electronic records in the bank's computer memory. Without the computer working, that money doesn't exist. Some days pass before the average unprepared person realizes that the power isn't going to come back on. That's when the panic sets in. They mob the grocery stores, getting whatever they can, looting whatever they can. From the grocery store lootings, panic spreads. People invade convenience stores, hardware stores, liquor stores, and even electronic stores, not realizing those electronics are fried inside. Stores everywhere are ransacked, and everything that might be useful for survival is stolen. The average person is unprepared for any real emergency. They have somewhere between 3 days and a week's worth of food in their homes. Their emergency supplies are mostly a flashlight, an extra blanket, and a bag of charcoal for the grill. Without the infrastructure we depend on to provide our needs, many people die. Then people start dying in waves. Disaster experts have laid out 5 waves of death that will sweep through the country. First, we lose the sick and elderly. There are many people in our modern society who can't survive without medicines. Without their medicines, their bodies can't keep going. Everyone from diabetics to people with severe mental problems start to die off when they run out of meds. The second wave of deaths is caused by disease. Without running water and water treatment, human waste disposal becomes a problem, triggering an epidemic that sweeps through populations. Many die of diseases that America's doctors haven't had to deal with for generations. Without their modern laboratories, hospitals, and medicines, doctors are limited in what they can do, forced to leave many to die, who they could have saved a few short months earlier. Third, food becomes scarce, and starvation rages across the country. FEMA stockpiles will only feed people for a few days. With high-tech farm equipment wiped out, food will rot on farms, uneaten, while people a few hundred miles away die from hunger. Only the small farmers will be able to keep their crops alive, and that'll only be enough to keep their families alive. Many pets die a slow death when there's nobody there to feed them or let them loose. Children get frail and starve, while their parents weep because they can't provide. The fourth wave of deaths comes with the winter, combining starvation with a lack of heat. Many freeze to death that first winter, with nobody to mourn their agonizing demise or to give them a decent burial. Those who are still alive are too weak to take care of the dying, let alone bury the dead in the ground that is frozen rock hard. With rampant famine and disease, society will break down. That's when the fifth and final phase of deaths hits, and it's the worst to think about. Men will start roaming the streets, going from house to house, preying on each other, stealing what they want and forcing their will on others. Rape will become commonplace, as women are forced to sell their bodies for food. And before you say that no woman you know would ever do that, ask yourself if there's anything they wouldn't do to put food in their starving children's bellies. Desperate people do terrible things. Some people will even turn to cannibalism, eating the flesh of other human beings, seeing it as being a better alternative than dying. Gangs, criminals, and warlords will rise up, using force to steal and murder. There will also be religious cults that rise up, following one who says that he has a message from God, or even from Satan, about how this is all caused by our sin or lack of sin. Either way, the message and the messenger are all false, merely a way to manipulate the masses, to take advantage of the situation. With all these people preying on each other, the world becomes a nightmare. By the end of the first year, an estimated 90% of our population has died. Seeing how careless and unprepared more than 90% of people are, it doesn't sound unreasonable. Those that are left have reverted back to the agricultural hard life of a century or more ago. Some moved from their homes into other places, where they can raise their own food, while others turn their homes into homesteads. Some smaller communities pull together, pooling their resources and working together to survive. But these are rare. In most cases, people simply die of horrible deaths. Only those few who are prepared will survive this EMP attack. Many people expect the government to take care of them, and so they turn a blind eye to the dangers out there, especially the chief danger of an EMP attack by Iran. These sheeple are the ones who end up dying off in that first year. They believe in a group of incompetents and crooks called government that are not even prepared themselves to survive an EMP event. What makes them think that the government will be able to protect them? All we have to do is remember how ineffective the government is in dealing with disasters. When Hurricane Katrina hit, the government didn't save the people of New Orleans from the flood, from the following disease, or from the following social chaos of gangs or murderers and rapists. 7 years later, when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast, FEMA didn't even do one little bit better. The liberal media tried to hide this as much as they could to save Obama's face. However, we real patriots know the truth. Those were just smaller-scale regional events, not even dealing with a whole state. Think of how badly FEMA screwed up with these regional disasters, letting people drown, die of thirst, and even get murdered by thugs and gangs. Now imagine that happening in every city, town, and county in the country. Even worse, an EMP will knock out all the equipment FEMA depends on, so it'll be worse than ever. The best we can expect out of FEMA is to open up some relocation camps, more like concentration camps, and move people into them. But what then? FEMA might have millions of meals of emergency food stored in warehouses, but they still don't have enough to feed everyone. There's no way that they can. After they run out, which should only take a day or two, they'll be going door to door to steal your stockpiles to give to government officials and other important people. So the wise decision is not to trust the government to take care of you and your family. Truth is, if you see a government agent in a post-EMP world, run in the opposite direction. They'll be there to take what you have, not to help you out. When an EMP hits our country, we could pretty much count on everything that relies on electricity going out. That would put our country back 100 years or more, back to the time of our great-great-great-grandparents. Well, if they could live without electrical power and all the things that use it, then it should be possible for us to live without them too. I decided I wasn't going to give up, lie down, and give in to an EMP attack and the following chaos. I decided to make a plan of how to survive without electricity and how to keep my family safe from the collapse a nationwide blackout will trigger. This wasn't easy, as we're so accustomed to using electricity for everything. We're also used to having a huge supply chain, which brings everything we need right to our doorstep. None of that is going to be available. I knew I needed to figure out 3 things. 1, how to keep my family fed, warm, and healthy without electricity. 2, how to make sure an EMP event will do the least amount of damage to my electronics, and how to generate my own power once the grid is destroyed. And 3, how to survive the social chaos and violence that will follow an EMP event as money disappears, grocery store shelves go bare, and people start panicking. My first step was to find the best example of people who live without electricity. I first thought of the Amish. They plant and harvest crops, build houses, and get by entirely without electrical power, right? Wrong. While most people think the Amish don't use any technology or electricity, the truth is that they only avoid public power. They still use batteries or generators to power home lighting, appliances like washing machines, and all sorts of equipment for their farms and businesses. Now, I'm not judging them for using power. They're not doing anything wrong. It's just that people have the wrong idea about them. Once I discovered the truth, I realized that the Amish are almost as vulnerable to an EMP attack as the rest of the country. So it wouldn't make sense to go live with them to learn how to survive a nationwide blackout. I had to continue my search for a real example of 100% electricity-free survival. But I'll tell you what, I'm not sure it exists anymore. Even in tiny communities in the mountains in South America or deep in Africa, people still use electronics powered by generators. It's like our entire species has become dependent on electrical power.